This is not just a story about betrayal. It's the sound of a family shattering, the taste of truth served at a table meant for love, and the voice of a woman who refused to stay silent. If you've ever given everything only to be torn apart by the ones closest to you, then you already know how this story begins. The day of the barbecue is carved into me like a scar. I can still hear the clatter of plates, the hiss of meat searing on the grill, the clinking of glasses filled too high with cheap red wine. The air was thick with smoke and the perfume of roasted garlic, a smell that once meant family, celebration, togetherness. That day it was the smell of betrayal masked with spice. I had set the long wooden table outside, under the faded canopy my husband bought years ago when we still pretended we were happy. My hands moved mechanically, arranging the silverware, smoothing the cloth, pouring drinks, while inside me a storm churned. Every gesture was calculated. Every movement was rehearsed. Because that day, I wasn't just serving food. I was serving truth. And truth I had decided would no longer stay hidden. The guests sat down slowly, laughter bubbling as if nothing in the world was broken. My sister, my own sister, sat at the far side of the table, her hair tied neatly, her smile painted too perfect. She leaned closer to my husband, whispering something that made him chuckle under his breath. I had seen that laugh before, soft and intimate, a laugh meant for me years ago in the early mornings when love was still alive. Now it was hers. She stole it, and he gave it freely. I carried the tray with steady hands, though my heart hammered like a drum inside my chest. On each plate of meat, glistening with juices, I had slipped a folded napkin. To anyone else it looked like part of the setting, but inside each napkin was a single sentence I had written in my careful hand, words that burned to be spoken aloud but would sting sharper on paper. I placed the plates in front of them, one by one, until I set the final plate before my sister and my husband. The table buzzed with chatter, forks scraping, glasses raised. My daughter asked for more bread. A cousin made a joke about the grill smoke. And then it happened. My sister unfolded her napkin to wipe her mouth. She froze. Her eyes darted down. Her lips parted. My husband noticed, confused, and unfolded his as well. The blood drained from his face. The words lay naked in their hands. How long did you think I wouldn't know? Silence cracked across the table. The laughter died mid-breath. Glasses hovered in the air, frozen. My daughter's fork clinked against her plate. My sister's hands shook, the napkin trembling like a white flag caught in the wind. My husband muttered my name, low and strangled, as if that single word could rewind the hours, the months, the years of deception. Then the explosion came. "Are you insane?" my sister hissed, her voice sharp, trying to control the tremor in her throat. "Enough," I said. My voice was low but heavy, cutting through the air like steel. "It ends today. You think you've been clever? You think I haven't seen? Every late night, every whispered call, every lie dressed as work. You thought you could keep me blind. But I am not blind anymore." The guests erupted. Some gasped. Others whispered. Some stared at their plates as though if they didn't look at us, they wouldn't be pulled into the storm. My daughter burst into tears, her small voice pleading, "Mom, please." But I couldn't stop. Not anymore. My husband stood, his chair scraping violently against the stone floor. "This isn't the time or place," he said, his voice trembling, anger covering fear. I laughed, a sound that startled even me, sharp and bitter. "Oh, it's exactly the time. It's exactly the place. You brought my betrayal to this table. You brought it into my home, into my family. Today everyone will see what I've been carrying alone." My sister's face turned pale, her hands gripping the napkin so tight it tore. "It wasn't like that," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Wasn't like that?" I snapped. "Then tell them what it was. Tell them why his cologne clung to your dress. Tell them why he knew the scar on your shoulder you got when you were 12. Tell them why the man I married turned his vows into lies and dragged my blood into it." The silence before the shouts was suffocating. Then voices rose, overlapping, the table exploding in cries, accusations, denial. Plates clattered, glasses tipped, wine staining the cloth like blood. And I stood at the head of the chaos, my hands flat on the table, my body trembling but unbroken. That was the moment I chose not to be silent anymore. The moment my house of lies collapsed in front of everyone, brick by brick, secret by secret. The day of the barbecue, the day of the plate, the day when truth finally screamed louder than betrayal. People often assume betrayal begins with one choice, one kiss, one lie. But in truth, betrayal is built on years. Years of devotion, of sacrifices made in silence, of trust given without conditions. And I gave all of that. I gave myself, piece by piece, until there was nothing left untouched by the shadow of my loyalty. When I met him back in 2001, I was 22. We were young, broke, and foolish enough to believe that love alone could pay the bills. He worked in construction, his hands always raw and cracked, while I spent my days waiting tables and my nights studying for certifications that would get me into an office job. We shared a one-bedroom apartment where the heater rattled in winter, and the neighbors fought so loudly through the walls that sometimes I pressed my hands over his ears to block the sound. We promised each other that the struggle was temporary, and I believed him when he swore we'd rise together. By 2005, we had scraped together enough for a small house. The mortgage nearly suffocated us, but I filled those walls with warmth. I painted the kitchen yellow so the mornings felt brighter. I planted roses by the window, though my hands blistered in the sun. I worked overtime, balanced bills with pennies left over, and when our daughter was born in 2007, I smiled through the exhaustion because I thought we were building something solid. He kissed my forehead in the hospital and whispered, "You're my whole world." I carried that line like scripture. The years rolled forward like wheels on a track. I ironed his shirts when he switched jobs in 2010, supporting him through late-night study sessions so he could get a promotion. I cooked his favorite meals when money was thin, turning scraps into feasts. In 2013, when my mother passed, I buried my grief quietly so I wouldn't weigh him down. I thought that's what devotion meant: silence, resilience, carrying the weight without complaint. And when my sister, my own sister, began visiting more often around 2015, I thought it was a blessing. She had always been close to me, younger, fragile in ways that made me feel protective. I opened my home to her, welcomed her into our dinners, our birthdays, our Sunday afternoons. I believed I was sharing my happiness with her. I never thought I was handing her the keys to my ruin. There were years of laughter too, of course. Vacations we couldn't really afford but took anyway. Long drives with the windows rolled down. Nights when we lay on the couch and watched old movies until we fell asleep tangled in blankets. I remember him surprising me with flowers once, in 2016, simple carnations from a gas station. He grinned sheepishly, and I felt like the luckiest woman alive because I believed those flowers meant he still saw me. I gave him loyalty not just in the easy days, but in the cruel ones. In 2018, when he lost his job for nearly 6 months, I held everything together. I worked double, borrowed money from people I swore I'd never ask, cut corners until corners no longer existed. I told him it was okay, that we'd get through it. I lifted him while I sank, because that's what I thought love demanded. And when he finally found work again, I celebrated as though it had been my victory too. All those years I told myself devotion was the glue, that if I kept giving, kept enduring, kept loving past exhaustion, nothing could break us. I didn't see how that devotion became a curtain behind which lies could thrive. I didn't see how my sacrifices turned invisible, expected, unacknowledged. And my sister, she was there through it all, sitting at my table, eating the meals I worked to provide, laughing at the jokes that made me feel less tired. She was part of the picture, part of the life I was fighting so hard to protect. I never once thought she was studying the cracks in our foundation, waiting to slip into the spaces I left uncovered. Looking back now, I see my devotion for what it was, both strength and weakness. Strength, because it carried a family through years when everything should have collapsed. Weakness, because it blinded me to the truth. I built a fortress for them both and never noticed they were hiding in its shadows. whispering behind walls I had raised with my own hands. People ask why I stayed so long, why I gave so much. The answer is simple: because I believed in the story we were writing. I thought every sacrifice was a chapter in a book that would end with love triumphant. Instead, those sacrifices became fuel for a fire that burned me alive. Cracks don't roar into existence. They whisper. They sneak in, disguised as ordinary days, as harmless excuses, as looks that last 1 second too long. When I look back, I realize the cracks in my marriage didn't arrive all at once. They arrived like hairline fractures, spreading silently, waiting for the weight of truth to break them wide open. The first one appeared in 2019. It was a text message. I remember it vividly because of how small it seemed at the time. He had left his phone on the kitchen counter, screen glowing with a notification. I wasn't snooping. I was wiping crumbs when the message lit up. Just 3 words. Miss you already. No name, no context. But it wasn't my message. I hadn't sent it. My chest tightened. But when I asked, he laughed. It's from a coworker, just a joke. Don't overthink it. And I wanted to believe him, so I did. But after that, I began to notice the patterns. The late nights at the office that stretched past midnight. The phone calls he took in the garage. His voice low, almost gentle, in a way he no longer spoke to me. The smell of perfume lingering faintly on his jacket. Not mine. Never mine. He brushed it off with excuses, stories about clients, about deadlines, about stress. And each time, I swallowed the doubts because swallowing was easier than choking on the truth. By 2020, the excuses multiplied. The project ran late. When we grabbed drinks after work, my phone died. Each sentence was a brick stacking higher, building a wall between us. I tried to climb that wall with tenderness. I cooked his favorite meals, planned small getaways, touched his hand at night hoping he'd squeeze back. But more often than not, his hand lay limp. His body turned away, his mind somewhere I couldn't reach. Then came the whispers about my sister. At first, I ignored them. Families gossip. Neighbors exaggerate. People see shadows where there are none. But the first time I saw them share a glance across the room, my stomach turned. It was subtle, fleeting, the kind of look that would mean nothing to anyone else. But to me, it was a thread of intimacy, a language built in silence. My sister laughed too hard at his jokes. He poured her wine before mine. Once, at a family gathering, I caught her brushing a crumb from his shirt sleeve, a gesture so small, but intimate enough to freeze my blood. I told myself I was paranoid. She was my sister, my blood, the girl I once defended in school when others mocked her, the one I shared a bedroom with as children, whispering secrets long after lights out. How could she betray me? And yet, when I watched her lean in closer to him at the dinner table, her smile curving in a way that wasn't meant for siblings-in-law, the doubt began to carve its place in my chest. By 2021, I stopped sleeping through the night. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling fan spinning in slow circles, my mind replaying every detail. His sudden absences, her sudden closeness, the way they avoided each other too carefully when I was near, as if rehearsed. I tried to confront him once, my voice shaking as I asked, "Is there something you're not telling me?" He sighed, annoyed, as though my question was an inconvenience. "You're imagining things. You've always been dramatic." His dismissal cut deeper than a confession would have. I even confronted her once, my sister, in 2022. We were standing in my kitchen, the smell of coffee between us, sunlight streaming across her face. I asked lightly, forcing a smile, "You and him? You're not hiding anything from me, are you?" She laughed too quickly, a sound brittle as glass. "Don't be ridiculous." But her eyes didn't meet mine. That was when I realized the cracks were no longer invisible. They were spreading, widening, daring me to look closer. The hardest part was the loneliness. Betrayal doesn't just rob you of love, it robs you of certainty. Every conversation became a puzzle, every gesture a question mark. I stopped recognizing the man I had married, and worse, I started questioning the sister I had trusted my whole life. It was like watching a painting fade, colors bleeding out until only shadows remained. And still, I stayed silent. Because silence felt safer than confirmation. Because I told myself that if I didn't ask the wrong question, maybe I could keep the illusion intact. But illusions don't last. They crack, they crumble, and when they do, they bury you in the rubble. The first cracks didn't break me, but they warned me. They whispered of the collapse that was coming. I should have listened. I should have seen. If betrayal from a husband is a wound, betrayal from a sister is the knife twisted inside it. I didn't want to see her shadow creeping into my marriage, but once the cracks appeared, her presence began to feel different, heavier, like a figure standing too close in a photograph. She was there in places she never used to be, filling spaces that belonged to me. It began innocently enough. Around 2015, when she started visiting more often, I thought it was just loneliness. She had broken up with a boyfriend, she was struggling with bills, she wanted company. I opened my door without hesitation. I cooked for her, poured her wine, let her sink into my couch as though it were her own. She was my sister, my blood. I believed that meant safety. But slowly, her presence changed. At family dinners, I caught her leaning closer to him, her laughter bubbling too easily when he spoke. At first, I brushed it off. She was always quick to laugh, always eager to charm. Yet the way her eyes lingered was different. It was the look of someone studying, someone memorizing. One night in 2018, she stayed late after everyone had gone home. I was cleaning dishes in the kitchen when I heard them in the living room. Nothing explicit, nothing scandalous. Just a quiet hum of conversation, low and steady, as though they were speaking a language I wasn't meant to understand. When I entered, they stopped abruptly. My husband cleared his throat. She smiled too brightly. "We were just talking about music," she said. But her cheeks were flushed as though she had been caught in something far deeper. By 2020, their little gestures began to accumulate. She teased him in ways that were once mine. He defended her in arguments that had nothing to do with him. Once, during a barbecue in our backyard, I caught him brushing ash from her shoulder, his hand lingering for a fraction of a second too long. My heart stuttered in my chest, but I swallowed it, telling myself it was nothing, because the alternative was unthinkable. But the unthinkable has a way of clawing its way into the light. I began to notice how they looked at each other when they thought no one else was watching. A look of recognition, of shared memory. My husband never looked at me like that anymore. My sister never looked at anyone else like that at all. One afternoon in 2021, I invited her over for coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, steam curling from our mugs. I studied her, the curve of her lips, the way her fingers tapped against the porcelain. I asked her lightly, almost playfully, "You're not hiding anything from me, are you?" She froze for half a second, then laughed. "Don't be ridiculous." But her laughter was sharp, brittle. Her eyes darted to the window instead of to me. And in that silence, the truth whispered through the cracks. What hurt the most was how seamlessly she fit into the role. She helped me set the table during holidays, her hands brushing his as they placed dishes down. She volunteered to run errands with him, insisting it was easier than making me go. She stayed late, her voice echoing in my hallway, while I lay awake in bed listening, feeling the distance stretch between us like a widening canyon. I started to feel like a ghost in my own home. The three of us would sit in the living room, and I could sense a current passing between them, invisible but undeniable. I was there in body, but I wasn't part of the conversation anymore. They shared glances, half smiles, small jokes with no context. I would laugh nervously, trying to bridge the gap, but the silence that followed always reminded me that I was outside their circle. The shadow of my sister grew so long it began to darken everything. When I hugged her, I felt her body stiffen. When I kissed her cheek, she turned slightly, as if uncomfortable. She had once been my confidant, the one I called at midnight to cry, the one I trusted with my secrets. Now she was a stranger in familiar skin, holding pieces of my life that didn't belong to her. I wanted to confront her, but fear held me back. Fear of destroying the fragile illusion that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. Fear of hearing words I couldn't unhear. So instead, I let her shadow spread across my life, dimming every room I walked into. And that's the cruelty of betrayal from blood. It doesn't come with warning signs you can accept easily. It comes with denial, with the voice inside whispering, "She's your sister. She would never do this." But shadows don't lie. They only lengthen until the day you have no choice but to face what's standing there. There comes a moment in every crumbling story when denial is no longer enough. You want to keep believing the excuses, the smiles, the practiced lies. But then they ask you for something so absurd, so insulting, that the veil falls away. For me, it was the request that broke the fragile illusion I had been clinging to. It was late autumn, 2022. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of rain and fallen leaves. I was sitting at the kitchen table, bills spread in front of me, the overhead light flickering faintly. He walked in, his steps heavy, his eyes avoiding mine. My sister had been spending more time with us again, and I could feel the tension tightening with every visit. But I kept pushing the thought away. I wanted to preserve what little was left. He cleared his throat and said, "I need you to do me a favor." I looked up, tired but willing. "What is it?" His hands fidgeted against the back of the chair, his jaw tight. "If anyone asks where I was last weekend, just tell them I was with you, that we went to visit your aunt." I blinked. My aunt had been dead for years. My chest tightened, the air thickening around me. "Why would I say that?" I asked slowly, each word like a stone falling between us. He shrugged, too casual, too forced. "It's just easier this way. People talk. You know how they are." But it wasn't just him. Days later, my sister came by, her perfume sharp, her smile too practiced. She lingered in the doorway of the kitchen as I washed dishes. "He told me he asked you," she said, her voice light but her eyes calculating. "It would really help if you just went along with it. It's better for everyone." I turned, water dripping from my hands. "Better for who?" Her smile faltered, and for the first time I saw the steel beneath it. "For you too," she said. "You don't want people talking." The words hit me like a slap. My own sister, asking me to lie, to cover for them, to erase myself so they could keep living their story untouched. The audacity of it made my stomach churn. They weren't just betraying me in silence anymore. They were asking me to participate, to build the cage around myself with my own hands. I wanted to scream at her, to throw the dish still wet in my hand against the wall, but my voice came out soft, trembling. "You're asking me to pretend I don't see what's in front of me." She tilted her head, her eyes cold. "Sometimes pretending is easier." That was the moment something inside me snapped. Until then, I had lived in the cracks, convincing myself that maybe I was wrong, that maybe love and blood could not betray so deeply. But when they stood before me, my husband with his cowardice, my sister with her arrogance, asking me to erase reality for their convenience, I saw the truth without shadows. The impossible request wasn't about covering one lie, it was about silencing me completely. It was about reducing me to a background figure, someone who could be manipulated into carrying the weight of their choices. And in that moment, I realized that every sacrifice I had made, every ounce of devotion, had not earned me respect. It had taught them I was willing to bear anything. I didn't answer them that night. I let silence be my shield. But inside, I made a promise. I would no longer play the role they assigned me. If they wanted me erased, they would have to do it in front of everyone, under the full light of day. And that decision, that refusal to comply, was the beginning of my revenge. Truth doesn't arrive politely. It snaps. It tears through the silence like glass shattering on tile, sudden and merciless. For me, the snap came not with a confession, not with a confrontation, but with something far smaller, almost ordinary, until it wasn't. It was January of 2023, a cold Sunday morning. I was cleaning the living room, gathering cups and blankets after a small gathering we'd had the night before. My husband had gone out early, claiming he needed to pick something up, his tone as casual as if the words weren't knives. My sister had left her scarf behind, tossed carelessly over the back of a chair. When I picked it up to fold it, something slipped from the fabric and fell onto the floor. A receipt. I bent down. my hands trembling before I even read it. It was from a motel off the highway, dated 2 nights earlier. A room for two, paid in cash. The pit in my stomach spread like poison. My hands went numb, my breath shallow. I knew. I had known for months, years maybe, but seeing it in print, black and white, stripped away the last of my denial. I sat there on the floor, clutching that slip of paper, the sound of the clock ticking louder than my own heartbeat. My mind raced. Every late night, every whisper, every glance between them, every impossible request, all colliding into one undeniable truth. My husband and my sister weren't just shadows in my suspicion anymore. They were a reality I could no longer run from. Later that day, I searched. It was no longer about gut feelings. It was about proof. And proof, I discovered, doesn't hide well when you finally dare to look. His phone, left on the dresser, unlocked by habit. Messages. Not paragraphs, not full confessions. Just fragments. But enough. Last night was everything. I can't stop thinking about you. A heart emoji sent at 2:17 in the morning. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred, until the phone slipped from my hands. And then there was the photo. A neighbor, well-meaning but oblivious, sent me a picture from a holiday party I hadn't attended. "Look who I ran into," she wrote. In the image, my husband stood with his arm slung carelessly around my sister's waist, their faces lit with the kind of joy that had long since vanished from his gaze when he looked at me. I studied their eyes, their posture, the ease of their closeness. It was the kind of picture that didn't need a caption. It spoke for itself. That was the snap of truth, the moment when all the whispers became screams in my head, when denial could no longer protect me, when every lie collapsed into dust. I didn't confront them right away. Instead, I carried the truth inside me like a loaded weapon. I studied them in silence, testing their words, measuring their excuses against the evidence I held. I watched my sister laugh at my table, her fork clinking against the plate, her smile stretching too wide. I watched my husband kiss me goodnight with lips that no longer belonged to me. I observed like a stranger, each second a dagger, until my silence felt like power rather than weakness. But silence has a weight. It presses against your ribs. It poisons your sleep. I would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, the receipt burned into my vision. I would walk through the house, touching walls I had painted, pictures I had framed, all of it feeling foreign now, tainted. My home wasn't mine anymore. It was their stage, their hiding place. The cruelest part wasn't just knowing. It was remembering every sacrifice I had made, every time I had chosen them over myself, every moment I had trusted, remembering the child I had once rocked to sleep alongside my sister, the way we used to whisper secrets under blankets, promising we'd always protect each other, remembering my husband's vows, spoken in front of God and family, words that once felt like pillars, all of it shattered, lying at my feet like broken glass. But in that breaking, something else awoke. A clarity sharper than rage, deeper than grief. If they thought I would carry their lies in silence forever, they didn't know me at all. The snap of truth was not just the end of my denial. It was the birth of my resolve. I began to plan. There are confrontations that erupt in shouting, and there are confrontations that unfold in silence. Mine began with silence, the kind that stretches so thick, you can almost hear the weight of it pressing against your skin. By then I had the proof. Receipts, messages, pictures. I could have screamed, thrown everything on the table, demanded answers, but I didn't. Instead, I chose to let the truth hang between us like a storm cloud ready to break. It started at dinner one night, just the three of us, as if nothing were wrong. My husband, my sister, and me, sitting around the same wooden table I had scrubbed clean for years. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air, but the food turned to dust in my mouth. I watched them carefully, every gesture magnified. His hand brushed hers as he passed the salt. Her laugh lingered too long, too intimate. They thought they were discreet, but I could see it. The rhythm of their connection, the invisible thread binding them. I didn't speak. I smiled. I served the food. I nodded at their stories, but inside, my mind screamed. I wondered if they could feel it, the way my silence had changed. It wasn't the silence of ignorance anymore. It was the silence of knowledge, the silence of someone who has seen the mask slip and is only waiting for the right moment to pull it off entirely. Over the next weeks, I tested them. I asked casual questions, watching their eyes flicker. "Where were you last Thursday?" I asked him, my tone light. "You left so early, I barely noticed." He stumbled, muttering something about work. My sister shifted in her chair, suddenly fascinated by her phone. I left small traps, too, mentioning places they hadn't told me they'd been, dropping hints about things I couldn't possibly know. Except I did, from the receipt, the photos, the messages. Each time, I watched panic ripple across their faces, subtle but undeniable. My silence became a mirror, reflecting their guilt back at them. One night, I caught them in the hallway. I had risen for water, padding softly across the floor, when I saw them standing too close near the front door. Their voices were low, urgent. I froze in the shadows, heart hammering. "She suspects," my sister whispered. "She doesn't know anything." He hissed back, "Stop panicking." My body trembled, but I forced myself to retreat quietly, swallowing the sob that threatened to escape. They didn't know I was right there, listening. They didn't know the truth had already broken me open and hardened me into something else. That was my silent confrontation. Not a single blow, but 1,000 cuts delivered with steady eyes and unanswered questions. I let them see that I was watching. I let them feel the air tighten whenever we were in the same room. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I let my silence tell them I knew. But silence is not enough forever. Silence builds pressure, and pressure demands release. By the time the barbecue came, by the time I slid those napkins beneath their plates, I was done being silent. My confrontation would no longer be quiet, no longer hidden behind half smiles and tight jaws. It would be fire. It would be public. It would scorch the illusion they had built, leaving nothing but ash. Still, in those weeks before, my silence had its power. I saw them flinch under my gaze. I saw their hands shake when I entered the room. I saw my sister's laugh crack, brittle and hollow, when I looked at her too long. And I realized something vital. They weren't just betraying me. They were afraid of me. Afraid of what would happen when my silence finally broke. And that gave me strength. The day of the barbecue arrived like the climax of a play I had been forced to act in for too long. The sky was mercilessly bright, the kind of light that exposes every crack, every shadow. I remember standing in the kitchen that morning, knife in hand, chopping vegetables with a calmness that felt unnatural. My hands moved steadily, but my heart was racing, every beat reminding me of the storm I was about to unleash. Guests began arriving just after noon. Laughter filled the yard, mingling with the sound of meat sizzling on the grill, the air heavy with smoke and garlic. Neighbors clinked glasses, cousins chatted, children darted between tables. To anyone else, it was an ordinary Sunday gathering. But inside me, everything was trembling, a volcano waiting for its eruption. I watched my husband move among the guests, laughing, slapping shoulders, his charm as polished as ever. My sister was there too, her smile radiant, her dress chosen carefully, her every gesture designed to look effortless. She moved through my home like she belonged there, like it was hers. And in a way, it was. They had both taken it from me long before this day, but what they didn't know was that I had taken something back, the truth, and I had chosen this moment, this table, to deliver it. I prepared the plates with deliberate care, each one carrying not just food but a message. Inside every neatly folded napkin, tucked so no one could see at first glance, I had slipped a note. Some were blank, just decoys. But on 2 of them, the ones destined for my husband and my sister, I had written the words that had burned in my chest for months. How long did you think I wouldn't know? When I called everyone to the table, the air shifted. Glasses were filled, forks tapped impatiently, conversations spilled over like wine. I served the food myself, placing each plate with a steady hand. though I felt like I was trembling inside my skin. I saved their plates for last, my sister's and my husband's, laying them down in front of them as though I were crowning them in front of a crowd. The moment stretched. For a second, I thought maybe nothing would happen. Maybe they wouldn't notice. Maybe the world would go on pretending. But then my sister unfolded her napkin to dab her mouth. Her eyes flickered down and I saw it. The instant her face froze, her blood draining pale. My husband, curious, unfolded his as well. His lips parted, his jaw tightening. Silence fell like a blade across the table. The chatter stopped. Forks hovered. Children went quiet. All eyes shifted toward them, then toward me. My husband cleared his throat, a sound that cracked. "What is this?" His voice was low, but everyone heard. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence grow, let the weight of it press down on the crowd. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady, clear. "It's what you've both been hiding. It's what everyone deserves to see." The air erupted. Gasps, whispers, accusations. My sister stammered, her face flushed, her hands trembling as she crumpled the napkin in her fist. "She's lying," she said, her voice high, brittle. But her eyes betrayed her. They always had. My husband stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the stone. "This isn't the time or the place," he barked, his voice shaking with rage, but also fear. I laughed, and the sound startled even me. "It's exactly the time, and it's exactly the place. Because this is where you betrayed me. At my table, in my home, with my family watching. So this is where the truth belongs." The guests erupted into chaos. Some tried to calm the storm. Others leaned in eagerly, hungry for the spectacle. My daughter burst into tears, her small voice breaking as she pleaded, "Stop! Please stop!" But the words couldn't be unsaid, and the truth couldn't be hidden anymore. My sister rose from her chair, her voice sharp, desperate. "It wasn't like that," she tried to say, but the words fell flat. The silence after her denial was heavier than any admission. Everyone could see. Everyone could feel it. My husband slammed his hand against the table, the glasses rattling, wine spilling like blood across the cloth. "Enough!" he shouted, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. He knew he had been caught. And me. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I stood tall, my hands flat on the table, my eyes locked on theirs. I had carried their lies for too long. Today, I handed them back in front of the world. The barbecue was no longer a celebration. It was an execution of their facade, of my silence, of the story they had forced me into. The smell of smoke and charred meat hung in the air like the scent of something burned beyond saving. That was the day the table turned into a battlefield. The day whispers became screams. The day betrayal was dragged into the sunlight and left bare for everyone to see. The barbecue didn't just unravel, it detonated. One moment the table was heavy with food and false laughter. The next it was a battlefield where every hidden truth erupted like shrapnel. I can still hear the sound, not of fireworks or thunder, but of voices breaking into chaos, of trust shattering beyond repair. My sister's face was crimson, her hands trembling as she held the napkin I had given her, the words on it burning into her skin as if they had been carved there. She tried to deny it at first, her voice high and brittle. "She's making this up," she said, looking around the table as though searching for allies. "She's jealous, she's twisting everything." But no one spoke up. No one defended her. The silence from the guests was deafening, an unspoken verdict. Because even if they hadn't known before, they could see it now in her eyes, in his silence, in the way their bodies betrayed them without words. My husband stood, his chair scraping harshly against the stone patio. His fists were clenched, his face a mask of rage and fear. "This isn't true," he shouted, but his voice cracked, betraying him. Then he turned to me, his eyes blazing. "Why would you do this? Why would you humiliate us like this?" I met his gaze without flinching. "Us," I repeated, my voice low but sharp enough to slice the air. "There is no us. You killed that when you crawled into her bed." Gasps rippled around the table. Someone dropped a fork. A child began to cry. quickly hushed by a mother who looked as though she wanted to vanish into the ground. My sister slammed her palm onto the table, wine glasses toppling, liquid spreading like blood across the white cloth. "Stop it!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, my hand steady as I pushed my chair back and stood. My voice carried, clear and sharp, cutting through the din of whispers and sobs. "You, my sister, decided that betrayal wasn't just an option, it was your choice. And you—" I turned to him, my husband of more than 20 years, the man I once trusted with my life. "You let her. You welcomed her into the life we built, into the bed we shared. You both thought I wouldn't see it. You thought I would stay quiet." The crowd of relatives and friends began to murmur, some standing, some reaching for their bags, as if escape might shield them from the fire spreading across the table. My daughter sobbed, begging again for it to stop, but the dam had broken and the flood was unstoppable. He tried again, his voice desperate now, softer. "It wasn't like that. It wasn't—" I laughed, but the sound was hollow, jagged. "Then tell them. Tell everyone here what it was. Tell them why you asked me to lie for you. Tell them why your messages said you couldn't stop thinking about her. Tell them why the receipt from the motel had both your names." His face drained of color. My sister stared at me, wide-eyed, realizing at last that I had gathered the proof they thought I was too weak to collect. And then the shouting began. Not from me, my voice was done, but from them, the guilty, clawing for excuses, spitting venom to cover their shame. My sister screamed that I was bitter, that I had always been jealous. My husband shouted that I had driven him away with my devotion, my sacrifices, as though love itself had been the crime. Their words tangled, clashed, roared over each other until the table shook with the force of it. But the louder they screamed, the clearer the truth became to everyone watching. There was no denial strong enough to mask the way they looked at each other, no excuse thick enough to bury the guilt dripping from every word. Finally, I raised my hand, and against all odds, the noise faltered. My voice was calm, steady, final. "You betrayed me, both of you. And today, I've taken back the one thing you couldn't steal, my voice. You don't get to bury me in silence anymore." Then I stepped back from the table. Plates clattered as guests pushed away, unwilling to stay in the fallout. Some whispered apologies as they slipped out. Others avoided my eyes. My daughter sat frozen, caught in the wreckage of two people she loved destroying themselves in public. The barbecue was over. Not with laughter, not with family, but with an explosion that scorched every bond, every illusion, every last trace of what I thought we were. And in the smoke of that destruction, something unexpected stirred inside me. It wasn't peace. It wasn't relief. It was a grim kind of freedom, raw and jagged, but real. When the echoes of that day finally faded, when the chairs were empty and the plates left abandoned, all that remained was silence. A silence so vast it seemed to swallow the house whole. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence after an explosion, where the dust still hangs in the air and you can taste the ash on your tongue. In the days that followed, I walked through rooms that felt unfamiliar, though I had lived in them for years. The couch where my husband once slept during long nights. The kitchen counter where my sister leaned, sipping coffee and laughing. The hallway where photographs of birthdays, graduations, Christmases still hung, mocking me with smiles that now felt like lies captured in frames. Everywhere I turned, ghosts of what I thought was love and family stared back at me. I asked myself 1,000 times, how did it come to this? Was there a moment I could have stopped it? A day I could have chosen differently? A sign I ignored that could have changed everything? But reflection, I've learned, isn't about rewinding the tape. It's about facing what's on it, unedited, no matter how much it hurts to watch. And the truth is this. I gave my love without measure. I sacrificed. I endured. I trusted. And still, the people closest to me, my husband, my sister, chose betrayal. Their choices do not erase my devotion. They do not redefine who I am. They reveal only who they are. The nights were the hardest. Lying awake, the darkness pressing against me, replaying every scene, every word, every laugh they shared when they thought I wasn't looking. Sometimes I would rise and pace the house, touching the walls, the furniture, the photographs, reminding myself that I still existed, that I hadn't disappeared just because they tried to erase me. Other times I would sit by the window, watching the streetlights blur through tears, wondering how many other women carried this same silent weight in their chest. But as the days stretched into weeks, something shifted. Pain has a way of hollowing you out, but in that hollow space, something else can grow. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but clarity. The clarity that I am more than what was done to me. That betrayal may change the story, but it doesn't define the ending. I began to reclaim small rituals, brewing coffee in the morning and drinking it slowly for myself, not for anyone else. Going for walks at dawn, when the air was cool and the world felt untouched. Cooking meals and sitting at the table alone, no longer seeing emptiness but strength in my own company. Each act, small as it was, stitched me back together in ways they never could. And my sister, I stopped calling her that in my mind. Blood may bind people by birth, but loyalty is the thread that makes them family. She cut that thread with her own hands, and now I no longer carry her in my definition of home. My husband, he is no longer my husband, just a man who once stood beside me and chose a path paved with lies. They will always carry their choices. I will carry mine. If you ask me what reflection means now, I will tell you this. It is standing in the mirror and seeing not the cracks they left, but the strength that grew in the spaces between. It is accepting that love does not guarantee loyalty, that sacrifice does not guarantee devotion. It is the courage to face betrayal and still choose to keep your heart alive. I don't know if time will ever dull the sharpness of what they did. Some wounds don't heal into smooth skin. They remain jagged, visible, a reminder. But maybe that's not weakness. Maybe scars are proof that you survived what tried to kill you. The day of the barbecue will always burn in my memory. The smell of smoke, the clatter of plates, the screams tearing through the air. But it will not be the only day that defines me. There are still mornings, still sunsets, still days ahead where my story belongs only to me. So I sit here tonight, pen in hand, writing not for them but for myself, because this is my voice, unbroken, unburied, unashamed. They tried to silence me with lies, but I have learned the power of truth, and truth, once spoken, cannot be taken back.